Want to have a great retirement? Make sure you value the right things.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
When I was in my early 20s, I didn't know much. I know that may be a surprise. But at the time, I was a newly minted financial advisor in 1990, 91. And the people that I worked with were probably not the best mentors. I basically traded technology stocks, and they valued things, the nice cars, the fancy dinners, all the things that, really don't go to creating a great life or to creating a great retirement. But I got caught up in that for a while. So my image was the people that lived in the huge homes and drove the beautiful cars. Those were the people that had made it. They must be financially secure. They must be rolling in dough to be able to live like that. So that was what I aspired to early in life. And I remember, I think I was 24, and I was at a cocktail party. And I was talking to a gentleman who was about 20 years older than I was. And he was a custom home builder. Built $1 million plus houses for these quote unquote people that had made it. So I'm saying, man, these homes that you build, they're so beautiful. The people that are buying them, this has to be the dream home that they're able to build after they've made it, after they become financially successful. And he looked at me and he sort of snickered and he said, Roger, you don't understand. The people that are building these kinds of homes, most of them are struggling to get into them financially. It's sad because once they get into them, most of them can't furnish them, and they just struggle to keep it up. They've basically built a financial cage that gives them no options in life. And this really blew my mind at the time. Makes total sense now. And since then, through working with hundreds and hundreds of clients, I've worked with clients that make $1 million a year that feel poor and they feel scared. And I worked with clients that are retiring, living on $60,000 a year, and they are living some of the richest lives I've ever seen. So if you want to have a great retirement, we got to make sure we make sure we know what we value, because that's really going to define a lot of our happiness. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to have a conversation about spending and counting the cost for retirement. And a good friend of mine, Jason Parker, has a great new tool that we're going to talk to him about. But we can't do any of that until we have this important disclaimer. Hey, I got a tip for you. This is the one thing you can do that I say that is a recommendation on the show anyway. And that is, don't take advice from me on this show. I can say, don't do that. I don't know anything about you. I only give advice to clients I work for as a fiduciary. You can learn about that at rogerwhitney.com. But until then, think of this as helpful hints and education. And before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, talk to your financial advisor, talk to your tax advisor, because that's just common sense. Now, before we get to the hot topics, I have a quick announcement that I think you might have an interest in. So let's be honest. Traditional retirement planning doesn't work. It doesn't inspire confidence about the future. It doesn't really give you much clarity of what kind of retirement and future you could have. Really, traditional retirement planning was built for your parents' more simpler lives, not yours. So if you're serious about creating a great life in retirement, I say you need a different approach. So I'm really excited about this. I just completed a 3-video series called the 5-Minute Retirement Makeover that talks about why traditional retirement planning isn't right for you, and how, if you rethink how you're approaching retirement and use agile retirement management, how you could be working towards a greater future. So if you would like to get access to this 3-video 5-Minute Retirement Makeover, all you got to do is go to 5minuteretirementmakeover.com. I'm really excited about this. I've worked hard on it. I'd love your feedback on it, but I think If you want to have a great retirement, this is the way you should approach it. So go to 5minuteretirementmakeover.com. Well, in the news today, I want to talk about how empty nester lifestyle creep can really mess up your retirement. So I'm 50. I have a about to be 20-year-old and 21-year-old. And what I have found, and it's really mirrored what I've seen in clients as they go through this phase in life, is it's an interesting phase because your kids are leaving the house. That role is starting to end. In your 50s, you're probably making more money than you ever have in your life. Statistically, according to the Federal Reserve, men in their mid-50s earn about 127% more than they were first starting out. And generally that grows in your 50s. So your kids are moving out, you're hitting your peak earnings years, and you're starting to define, okay, what is my life without kids, or what is our lives without kids? That's an exciting time, I know, because I'm going through it or just entering it, but it can also be a dangerous time, and here's why. When you are an empty nester and the kids are gone, what happens? It means you got a lot more time on your hands. You're not shuttling around your children, you're not going to as many as events. That role has ended, and all of a sudden you have time freedom outside of work. And that can lead to a lot of really cool things. You can explore different hobbies that you've been putting off or not doing as much. That could be golfing or sports cars or hunting or traveling, all sorts of things. You now have some time to go pursue. That's pretty cool. The other thing that's sort of cool is that when the kids leave the house, hey, now you can finally replace the carpet and update the house and not worry that it's going to get destroyed by, well, kids, right? Doesn't matter whether they're teenagers or not. So now you can upgrade the house. You can buy nicer stuff and feel like it's going to be safe. So you can go through this re-nesting as an empty nester. And you can build outdoor kitchens. You can buy nicer cars because you know you're not going to have to worry about shuttling people around. This is a real easy thing to do, and it's a real exciting time because either you by yourself or you and your spouse are redefining your relationship and what the rest of your life is going to be, which is a re-nesting thing. So it's easy to do all of these things and really upgrade your lifestyle because you got more time, you got more money, and you're excited about the future. That's awesome. It is awesome, but here's the danger. When you increase your lifestyle, when you buy that first, say, $50,000, $60,000 plus car, you don't just buy that car. Usually you're buying that car and all the other cars that you're going to buy because going down is a very hard thing to do in terms of lifestyle stuff. The same thing with the kind of house you have, that where you eat out. If you eat out at really nice restaurants all the time, the idea of going to less nice restaurants, less expensive restaurants is really hard for a lot of people to do. It's a psychological thing that a lot of us have trouble with. So in your 50s, it's an exciting time, but it's dangerous because what happens is you can literally expand your lifestyle in your 50s. And then when you really start to address retirement, well, what's one of the biggest goals in retirement? To maintain your lifestyle. So once the kids are out, you can have this big increase in your lifestyle expectations that you now have to figure out how to maintain when you're not working anymore. And that can be dangerous. So it doesn't mean you don't do nice things. We're doing some nice things. But the point is, you got to be careful about it. And you have to start counting the cost because what kind of lifestyle you want from a consumption standpoint is a huge determinant on many things. How much investment risk you're going to need to take, how much savings you're going to need to do, how much longer you're going to continue to work, how much time freedom, what your lifestyle might be in retirement, all sorts of things. So it's important to pay attention to that and to count the cost. And so we're going to talk about how to do that with a good friend, Jason Parker, in the Practical Planning segment. Well, welcome to the Practical Planning segment. And today we're going to talk about counting the cost on our lifestyle so we can really dial that in so we can plan for an amazing retirement. My experience is we really don't know how much we spend. And you know my feelings on budgeting. I hate to be a bookkeeper on my lifestyle, but as you're getting close to that retirement decision, it is important to dial that in as best you can, because it's hard to change it later on after you've left your job. So I invited a friend on, Jason Parker. He is the host of Sound Retirement Planning, which is a podcast, and I've had the honor of being on his show. And he is a practicing financial planner, and he's built a tool to help you count the cost, something that he used in his practice for years and converted it to something that you can actually use online to help you dial in your retirement spending. We're going to have a conversation with Jason so he can talk about his tool and some of the issues around dialing in that spending for retirement. So let's have this conversation with Jason. Hey, Jason, I'm excited to have you on the show for a few reasons. Number one is you got a great podcast, Sound Retirement Planning. Pretty cool guy. And you have created a pretty cool tool to help people estimate spending in retirement.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I really appreciate being a guest on your show today.
So I know you're a practicing planner. You work with clients on this journey towards retirement. What is it about really understanding what we spend that people get so wrong? Because it always seems that they either way overestimate or a lot of times they way underestimate. Why do you think that is?
That's a great question. I'm not quite sure. What I do know, though, from experience, and I'll share with you a couple of stories here. So, but from experience, it seems like the more income people have, the worse they are at really understanding their spending. One of my favorite quotes is from Benjamin Franklin. He says, "Beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship." From my experience with doing retirement planning, that sure can be the truth. And so I just wanted to share with you a quick story. I met with some folks. This was several years ago, almost 10 years ago now. But they came into my office. They had retired. And when they retired, they had about $500,000. And by the time they came in to see me, we had just gone through the financial crisis, a great big downturn in the stock market. When they retired, they thought that $500,000 was going to be plenty of money for them to last the rest of their lives. But they were only in their 70s when they came into my office, and that $500,000 had been almost completely depleted for two reasons. Number one, the stock market didn't behave as they had anticipated as they were making that transition into retirement. And number two, they really didn't understand their spending. They didn't understand their budget, and they ended up spending way too much money in the early years. So between spending too much and a bad stock market, they were kind of living out, I think, most people's nightmare, which is running out of money before you run out of retirement. So I'm not sure why people mess this up, but I do know that it's probably one of the most important pieces of a good retirement cash flow plan is really understanding your spending.
Well, and a lot of it is, don't you think that, wow, for decades, I mean, I'm 50 years old, and for decades, it's all been about saving and investing. And I've always had income, and generally the income has increased. I mean, not always. So you have this, nice inflow of money. So it's easy to get a little loosey-goosey on every single penny, especially on, as you make more income, right? Because it's more discretionary stuff that can slip through. So I guess it makes sense that the mentality when you retire, it's like a light switch. Most of the times that income stops, right?
Absolutely. This is why from a retirement planning standpoint, and you know this, I mean, if you're sitting down with somebody, the number one question people really want to have answered is, hey, am I going to be able to maintain the same standard of living in retirement that I have during my working years? And the question they always have is, have we saved enough money to support this lifestyle? And there's a lot of different pieces that go into that. But if we don't really have a clear picture of what your spending is, then it's really impossible to be able to answer the question of saying, have you saved enough? And so that's the reason that I created the retirement budget calculator, was because I just wanted to really help people dial in and think about all of those expenses. And it really is the highest income earners that mess this up the most. I mean, the people that are making several $100,000 a year of income, they tend to be the loosest with their spending just because they don't have to count every penny. But once you head into retirement, it is a different game. It's a different ball game altogether. Now what you have is what you have, and that money's got to support you for the rest of your life. So if you want to have more confidence as you make that journey into retirement, you better have a good understanding of what your spending is.
So when somebody's calculating their cost for retirement, how do they account for things that are seasonal? I mean, we hear this concept of go-go years of retirement and then slow-go years. How do you account for things that where you want to spend money for a certain period of time and then you don't when you're trying to factor this in?
Well, and it's one of the challenges when creating a good spending plan. And let me just say, Roger, the reason that sometimes people hear the word budget, and this is a really negative word for people, right?
It's the B word.
Yeah, it's the B word. Yeah. And in fact, I remember a couple of years ago, I had a couple in my office and we were talking and I just asked them straight out. I said, hey, when you hear the word budget, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And one person said, well, that's kind of a bad word. It means having to cut back or scale back. And the other person in that couple, they said, well, I think it's the prudent thing to do. And it's amazing how we can all hear the same word, but have a different emotional reaction to it. So I really want to emphasize that when we get into retirement, the reason that we're doing budgeting isn't because we're trying to cut back. What we're trying to help people do is spend as much money as they can, but still have the confidence to know that they're going to be able to make it through this entire life journey. And I like that you used the go-go years, the slow-go years, and then the no-go years to frame this. But what I ran into was oftentimes people would scribble down on a piece of paper what their monthly expenses were. And you're absolutely right. The monthly expenses are very important that we get those right, but we also have to be thinking about the property taxes that a lot of people only pay once a year, or the long-term care insurance premiums that only get paid once a year, or Christmas that happens once a year, or grandkids' birthdays. I mean, there's a lot of different little nuances there. And so if people are only looking at the expenses that occur in January and they're basing their entire year's budget off of 1 month of expenses, it could really mess this spending thing up. And remember, people only get one shot at retirement unless they want to go back to work, and that's not usually what a lot of people who we serve want. That's not what they want to do. So you want to make sure you get this piece right before you make the transition.
Do you believe in the rules of thumb of you're going to need 70% of your spending before you retire and those types of guidelines?
Well, the hard thing about rules of thumb is that we all have different sized thumbs. So I'm cautious with rules of thumb. Everybody's financial plan should be really unique to them. What I find is that some people, as they're heading into retirement, maybe they've worked really hard. And so now those, we talk about those go-go years, maybe they're planning on spending 120% of what they had been spending because they finally own their time and they really want to travel and spend more time with their grandkids. And so it's hard to use rules of thumb for estimating expenses. That's why I'm more of a numbers guy myself. I like to actually sit down and say, how much are we going to spend on travel? How much are we going to spend on Christmas? How much are we going to spend for birthdays and those types of events, as well as your day-to-day living? Yeah,
and a lot of it is, if you think of like a river, when you're going with the river, that's like having income coming in. You don't have to paddle real hard in terms of intentionality to live a great life because it naturally just pulls you downstream. A lot of times when you're in retirement, it's like going against the current. You have to be very intentional about the strokes that you take to maintain where you're at, that standard of living or that place in the river. So it's about this intentionality of, even if you weren't a big B person, now's the time to really get that dialed in because it means more than ever before.
Really the reason that I think so many people look forward to retirement is, number one, they own their time, so they're going to be able to experience a greater sense of freedom. And most people just want to have a greater sense of confidence that the numbers are going to work so that they don't have to sit up at night worrying about this thing, especially if they're depending on the stock market to produce returns on their savings. And, and that's typically the case today. More and more people are depending on their 401k and 403b and IRA to supplement their retirement income. So I read on the front page of my Social Security statement that I think Social Security says that for most retirees, Social Security will replace about 40% of their working year income, but that's an average. And high income earners, obviously, Social Security is not going to be probably anywhere near the 40% of their earning potential.
We talk about these go-go years of people wanting to spend more maybe than they were spending right before retirement. If you're not intentional in really counting the cost of what your lifestyle costs, it's easy to deny yourself those go-go years because you're worried and then realize after the fact, that, hey, I could have done that?
Yeah, here's the issue. Either you die with a lot of money in the bank or you die broke, right? I mean, neither one of those are really a great scenario to think that you worked all of your life and then you don't get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And then the other option is you run out of money too early. I mean, neither one of those are great scenarios. So it's just finding that balance point. Everybody's situation is going to be different. In the years of experience that I have helping people make this transition into and through retirement, I really find that regardless of how much money you've saved, everybody needs to understand the spending side of the equation. And so we wanted to create software that was different than a lot of the other budgeting tools out there. A lot of the budgeting tools I found are really to help people who are trying to get out of debt, or they're trying to allocate every single dollar that comes in. Most retirees aren't trying to do that. They don't want to micromanage their money. They don't want to have an app that they're plugging into every day and putting money into different accounts. They just want something that's going to help them understand how much they're spending. A lot of people traditionally, Roger, would go and use a spreadsheet to do this. And that's actually how we started out as well. And then some of the if, then, else statements just kept growing and growing and growing because we wanted to have this comprehensive calculator that really helped take into consideration a lot of these different pieces. And so instead of distributing the Excel spreadsheet to people, we said, well, let's turn this into a piece of software to help people.
So what's the best use of this software in terms of how difficult is it to use and what can someone get out of using it?
Well, first, let me say the software is at version 1.0. We just released this, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce it to people. And the first thing that we've done is we went through and we've categorized all of the different expenses people could run into in retirement so that we can help them organize their spending. But some of the neat things that it does that's hard to program into an Excel spreadsheet unless you're really good is that we allow people to assign a different inflation component to each expense that they have. And that's really important because some expenses, like a mortgage, for example, maybe you'll have a mortgage for a couple of years into your retirement and then that will pay off. But a mortgage doesn't go up with inflation. So we don't want to inflate every expense. But medical expenses, you might want to assume that medical expenses are going to increase at a rate greater than your cost for food. And so our calculator does that. It allows people to assign different inflation factors to their spending so that then we give them the ability to peek out into the future and say, okay, well, this is how much income we need today, but in inflation adjusted dollars, here's how much we're going to need 5 years, 10 years down into the future. And so that was one of the things that makes it really unique. One of the other things that the software does is we allow people to assign the day of the month that their bills are due, just so that they're organized, so they can quickly run a report to say, hey, is this due on the 1st or the 15th of every month? And then we also give people the ability to start and stop expenses. So like I say, if you have a mortgage, maybe you'll have a mortgage for a couple of years into retirement, and then that will be paid off. You can show that expense going away. Or maybe, you want to be planning 10 years from now, you're going to have a new car payment and you just want to see how that's going to impact your spending as time goes. So we really tried to think of all of the different pieces that people were going to run into. I'll tell you, one of the things people should be cautious with, this budgeting and using this tool it's easy, but it's not simple. It does take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort to actually sit down and make it work. But the idea was to create something that was going to be a little bit more user-friendly, in my opinion, than just trying to use a spreadsheet.
So a couple questions on the calculator. I've gotten to work with it, and as a planner, I love all the detail, and it's hard to think of all the things that you need to think of. And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of feedback now that it's live.
Oh, yeah.
The first question is, how should somebody approach using this so it doesn't become overwhelming?
Well, you're going to want to sit down and probably try to not do this all at once. So, take a couple of days over the course of a month and maybe sit down for 30 minutes at a time and just devote a little bit of time. Because, one of the things you're going to have to do is go into your checkbook register online and say, okay, what have I been spending for the electric bill over the last 3 months or so, or 6 months, just so you can really kind of dial in those numbers. So that would be the first thing is, try not to do it all at once. But the other thing is, again, we've tried to organize this in a way where we are taking into consideration all of the expenses that people could incur. One of the nice things we've done about the calculator is we've made it completely customizable so that, maybe we call an expense mortgage, but somebody else wants to call it a house loan. They have the ability to completely customize the different descriptions to match the way that they actually budget. And we wanted it to be flexible in that way. So I would say don't get overwhelmed. Take it slow, take it easy, and just know that there is going to be some work that you have to put into it as you're making that transition.
And then when should somebody start counting the cost for the expenses in retirement? I mean, how early should someone do that?
Well, I have to tell you, budgeting for my wife and I was a real game changer. And the way that we budget
now, that can be a game changer
home,
for good or bad, so I'm assuming this was for good.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's good. And we do the old-fashioned envelope budgeting method in our home, but we use this software. It actually, for us, it started out as a spreadsheet. And so one of the cool things about our calculator is if you have expenses that you plan on paying cash for, you can actually allocate money to cash and then run a report to see how much cash you need on the 1st or the 15th to be able to put cash in your envelope. So, I've been doing this since my early 30s, and the budgeting tool that we created is based on how my family budgets. And one of the problems, I think, with some of the software that's out there today is it requires you to be looking at the software all the time. And my belief is if you just create a good budget, maybe update it once every 6 months or once every year, or as your financial life changes, it's probably enough for most people. I mean, you and me are number nerds, Roger. I don't know how often you like budgeting, but my wife is an artist. So, I mean, if we sit down once a year to just go over everything, make adjustments as needed, that's really enough for our relationship. But I would say for most people, if they're getting ready for retirement, within maybe 2 years of retirement, really start to look at their spending. This tool is not designed to replace a financial advisor. But if you walk into somebody like, they call you, Roger, as a certified financial planner, and they say, here's my spending, and it's very detailed and organized, I would imagine that's just going to help you do a much better job of helping create a good retirement cash flow plan for those folks. So probably at least, 2 years before retirement, maybe as much as 5 years. But if they're like me and they just want to have more peace in their life and they want to have a good system for keeping track of their finances, you could be 30 years old and use the tool if you wanted to. I love Mr. Money Mustache's story. He retired at age 30. And I think sometimes people think of retirement as an age, and it's really not. Retirement is a number. And what Mr. Money Mustache figured out was that as soon as he had saved about 25 times his annual spending, he knew that he was in a position to retire. So I think sometimes when we talk about retirement, people automatically think age 60 or 55 or 65. But that's why I like Mr. Money Mustache's story, retiring at age 30.
So how safe is the data in there? Because you're entering, this is the software you designed, it's a portal that you go into. And obviously people are entering a lot of are they entering personal information, or is it just mainly numbers?
That's the other great thing. I mean, we heard from a lot of the people that we serve that are getting ready to retire is they didn't like some of these tools out there where you had to put in your bank accounts and it pulled all this data from your checking account and savings account because there's a single point of failure. You're putting all your username and password into one thing. And we didn't want to do that. So we, first of all, everything's encrypted. We're using the HTTPS protocol to make it as secure as possible online. But the other thing is we don't require people to put in any personal account information. You can keep this as plain vanilla as possible. If you want to put the name of the person that you're paying, the actual mortgage company name, you can put the name in there. But if you just want to call it house payment, you can call it house payment. So if somebody were to hack into the account, there's really, I guess you decide at what level you want to, how much detail you want to provide the calculator, but you can keep it very plain vanilla.
What I like best about it is that it gives a framework to think about counting the cost for what that lifestyle might be. Because a lot of times, we spend money on so many different things and we forget about it if we're not using a Mint or a Quicken. And it just helps us walk through the process rather than trying to remember everything. And that's so important when you're getting ready to retire. Now, what is the name of the calculator and how does someone get it?
Yeah, so you can find it at retirementbudgetcalculator.com. For your listeners, now this is a paid for service. It's a one-time fee, so it's not a subscription fee. But for your listeners, Roger, for the next 30 days, we are going to give them a 50% discount if they use the coupon code Roger. So they just have to put your name in there, and we'll give them, it will automatically show up as a 50% discount before they hit the checkout to purchase the calculator.
One reason I wanted to have you on the show is because this is such an important thing. This is one of the things that we can control the most. And I have no financial interest in this. I just think it's a great idea, and it's something that you were just using organically in your practice and took the amazing step to make it software. So thanks so much for sharing it, Jason.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really excited. I think, like I say, a lot of times when it comes to retirement, people are intimidated because maybe they don't want to go to a financial advisor because they haven't saved enough money or something like that. But regardless of your financial position, everybody needs to understand the spending piece. It's the most important part of a good retirement cash flow plan, is just understanding how much you spend.
On your marks, get set.
Hey, welcome to the SMART SPRINT segment, where we set a 7-day goal, take a little baby step towards creating a great retirement. So your assignment for the next 7 days, whether you're 10 years, 5 years, or in retirement, is take an hour and a half time block and build a little spreadsheet or use something like Jason's tool and just look at what your monthly spending is. I'm not asking you to become a bookkeeper and get super detailed if you don't want to. If you want to, that's great. But if you aren't that type of person, I think it's important to go ahead and spot check what you're spending money on so you can get an understanding and count the cost so you know what kind of lifestyle you're going to have to try to replicate when you get into retirement. So just give yourself an hour, open a bottle of wine, have a beer, have a soda, whatever your fancy is, and just do a spot check to see what your spending looks like. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how just to be a little happier. So I'll just talk a little bit about a journey that I'm on right now in terms of spending and happiness. If you've listened to the show long enough, you know that I like technology. I love gadgets. I love new gadgets. I like new in general, and I like to experiment with things. And I've discovered that I have an issue that I need to deal with when it comes to that type of thing. Not a huge issue, but I am willing to spend money on new or things that I think are going to help me build a better business, serve clients more, and I can be a little loosey-goosey about that. And I think there's some psychological thing in there that when I get something new and I get to experiment and unwrap it, what I've found is, as I become more self-aware about it, is that it's the newness part that I'm excited about. And I heard, I don't even remember where it was in passing, and it was someone talking about the collection of stuff or wealth. And what he said was, and this is an extremely wealthy man, I remember that. What he said was something to the effect of, the things aren't what drove him. Those were just some things that you collected along the way. But what drove him, and what seems to drive the most successful people, whether it's in business or in life, is the purpose that they're striving for. Whether it's to serve as a business or to create experiences as a family, it's not the thing, it's the underlying purpose that we live our life for. And that's a hard thing to figure out. But I think as we figure that out, I know as I'm figuring it out and dealing with my little technology obsession, I'm getting happier as I redefine what these things actually mean to me. So maybe that'll help you too. All right. I'm really excited about this 5-minute retirement makeover. I think it will help you shift your paradigm on how you're approaching creating a great retirement. So if you want to learn why current planning doesn't really work for our generation and a new way of thinking about it, a more agile way of thinking about it, go to 5minuteretirementmakeover.com. Until next week, this is Roger Whitney, the Retirement Answer Man.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.